All right, guys, your third and final lesson for spring break is about the Cold War here at home. We're actually going to start off with the death of Stalin. He dies of a mysteriously massive stroke in 1953 and is replaced by this guy, Nikita Khrushchev, the second in line. He immediately gets started with something known as de-Stalinization, where he starts basically getting rid of everything that was the remnants of Stalin's regime. But one of the things that he does continue on from Stalin is that he wants to prove the superiority of communism. He wants to make sure that everybody in the world knows that the Soviet Union will be the model communist state and that they will be the ones to lead the communist nations of the world. Um, he says this and goes so far as saying, "We will bury you," that basically communism will bury capitalism. And one of the ways that they look to do this is through the space race. The space race was the competition of space exploration between the United States and the Soviet Union to prove their technological superiority. Who is smarter? And unfortunately, it was going to be the Soviets. They actually were the first to launch a satellite. They launched the satellite Sputnik in 1957, which you see in the background here. And the entire world was amazed. Even though it was not our accomplishment, we were so amazed because it was the first time that any man-made object had made it into space. It was a huge human achievement, but it also scared us because now we realize that we are so far behind them. We didn't have anything in place to get into space. And so we begin to freak out and we need to get something in order to do this. So we create the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958 to counter the communist and the Soviet space program. We also create the National Defense Education Act, which authorized 4 years of funding to get U.S. schools up to speed in math and science so that would have future generations of technology people that would be able to get us further into space. But the Soviets would continue to beat us. They would get the first animal into space. They would get the first man into space within the next 7 years. And so we are going to be very far behind. But that doesn't stop us from having a fascination with space and with atomic design. Um, Atoms, space, etc. are going to be everywhere in 1950s design. You see it in the atomic looking clock up in the corner, the starburst pattern on the 1950s plate, and even in the rocket-like design of the fins and the tail lights of the car in the main picture here. But here at home, the main part that is going to affect us as far as the Cold War is going to be the Red Scare. And it's the second Red Scare. This began in the wake of World War II, where we were cautious and skeptical of the Soviet Union. And this was a general fear of communist subversion, where we thought that they were secretly trying to overthrow the United States government and destroy our society. This is only further escalated after the Soviets detonate Joe 1, which was the almost exact replica of our Fat Man, which made people start to wonder, how did they get those plans? And so we need to start keeping an eye on the commies. The first way we do this is through the National Security Council, which was created by Congress through the passage of the National Security Act of 1947. The idea of this is that they are created to advise the president on the integration of domestic, foreign, and military policies that relate to national security and also to facilitate cooperation between major agencies. It's made up of the president and vice president, important cabinet members like the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, high-ranking members of the military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as members of the intelligence agencies. And speaking of them, this is also when we create the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which was created to carry out covert operations against hostile foreign states or groups. Basically, the FBI's job is to investigate subversive activities at home. The CIA is to investigate subversive activities abroad. Now, if any of you guys have seen the show Get Smart, like you see pictured here, or maybe the movie, that was really popular in the 1950s and 60s because the CIA was so active during this period of time of the Cold War. However, we do have one major failure when we're keeping an eye on the commies, and that's the U-2 incident in 1960. A US U-2 spy plane was shot down over Soviet airspace, and as soon as it was shot down, we immediately denied that it was a spy plane. We didn't know anything about it. And then when they showed us that, they had the parts, they had the pilot, they had the photos that the pilot had been taking, we finally had to admit our role in this and also the role of the plane as a covert surveillance aircraft. The pilot was then forced to plead guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison and 7 years of hard labor. But above all of this, it was a huge embarrassment to the United States that we got caught. And it also deteriorated relationship further with the Soviet Union. So here at home, what we're really concerned about is keeping an eye on any potential communists that might be in the United States. This prompts the passage of the McCarran Act, which required communist organizations to register with the Attorney General. This was going to be very limiting in what these people could do. First of all, they were not allowed to become citizens. They many times were not allowed to leave the country, or if they left the country, they wouldn't be allowed back in. It was enacted over President Truman's veto, but it was designed to help protect Americans from these potentially dangerous people. But what it shows us really is just how scared we were of communist infiltration. And so one of the things that Truman does try to do to calm people's fears is institute a loyalty review program. This was going to screen all federal employees for their loyalty. They had to give an oath of loyalty to the United States. But what it does in reality is that it actually leads to a greater fear that communists were infiltrating the government. It was supposed to calm our fears, but instead people started wondering, well, why do they have to make an oath of loyalty? That means that somebody must be disloyal. So the House of Representatives creates a committee known as HUAC. This was actually created back in 1938 to investigate potential organized crime. But by the 1940s and 50s, its job was to investigate disloyalty and subversive activities and communist organizations. HUAC would then go on to have a series of public hearings on communist subversion that was at the urging of the leader of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. He also got HUAC to give him an okay to launch thousands of his own investigations, wiretap thousands of phones across the United States, and keep files on nearly everybody. It was a joke that J. Edgar Hoover probably had a file on his own mother. And it's really not too far to think about because he even had a file on the President of the United States. And so at these hearings by HUAC, they would press these people and ask them, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States? If you did not answer, or if you said yes, you could be imprisoned. And this goes as far as to hit the top levels of government. Alger Hiss was the highest ranking person who was questioned by HUAC. He had been Roosevelt's right-hand man, attended the Yalta Conference, and even helped with the organization of the United Nations. However, he was accused of being a communist by someone else who was being questioned by HUAC. When he was called in front of HUAC, he denied being a communist, denied being a spy, and denied knowing the guy who had accused him. It comes out that he did know the guy who accused him, and so he was indicted for perjury. However, he was never officially charged with subversion or spying, but it still totally tarnished his entire political career. And for the rest of his life, he would claim his innocence, but he would never hold high-ranking political office again. It goes further from here, where we get the Senate getting involved in these hearings. Senator Joseph McCarthy led the investigations for disloyalty and subversion. And he really was kind of the most prominent figure in the Red Scare. He came out saying that he had a list of 205 people that were known members of the Communist Party and that they were working in the government and that they were going to destroy America. The thing is that a lot of his information really wasn't all that accurate, wasn't that credible. And because of this, it got to be known as McCarthyism, kind of this communist witch hunt that was based on fear rather than evidence. He had a lot of support early on. People were like, yeah, go ahead and go get those commies. but it starts to deteriorate when he starts to attack members of the army. He has these public hearings where recently returned members of the Korean War are now being questioned about their loyalty to the United States. People are furious with this guy, and he is publicly censured um, by the Senate, where they basically tell him that they don't agree with his methods. And he was eventually voted out of office. What gets us even more scared are the commies that might live next door. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were accused of heading a Soviet spy ring, and they were regular civilians. They were convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage in relation to the atomic bomb, basically selling secrets to the Soviets, and were executed by the electric chair in 1953. The information that convicted them was collected through the Venona Project, and this was a counterintelligence program that was trying to nail down Soviet spies. In 1995, when this information was declassified, it was found that yes, Julius Rosenberg was a courier and recruiter for Soviets. However, Ethel's involvement wasn't clear. What was really terrifying for Americans, though, was the fact that they looked like anybody else. They looked like the people that might live next door to you, and it made people wonder, who could you really trust? What was even more terrifying for our government was that they knew that Hollywood had a much bigger impact on people's lives and had more influence than the government did. People knew celebrities much better than they knew their congressmen. And it led to the Hollywood blacklist, where you had screenwriters and actors and a bunch of other people in Hollywood that were blacklisted because of their suspected ties to communism. This included Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney, Lucille Ball. In These people were being uh, basically targeted because of their friendships or past ties to communism. We went even further to create a pamphlet called Red Channels that focused on the field of broadcasting and the impact of communist infiltration through the news, basically saying that they were sending um, subliminal messages through the news to get people to try and support communism and to rally against the United States. The Hollywood 10 actually fought back. These were 10 members of the film industry, publicly denounced the tactics by HUAC and ended up going to jail for it. But as a result, it showed that there was some major um, uh, problems with this Red Scare. The real Red Scare was shown by this guy, Arthur Miller, when he wrote The Crucible. This was a book or a play that dramatized the Salem witch trials, but what it really was an allegory for McCarthyism and the Red Scare. He was questioned by HUAC for his previous attendance at Communist Party hearings and was held in contempt of Congress by not naming names, and he actually went to prison for it for a while. But things ended up pretty good for him because, later on, he marries Marilyn Monroe. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of your spring break work, and we will meet up again when we come back from our break.